I'm going to talk about how to take a quote from a dialogue and turn it into a concrete detail or a sentence of evidence. Now, a dialogue is a little bit different, right? Because you need certain things when you're talking about what someone has said versus narration, because some books are going to have just a narration where it's the narrator speaking or telling the reader something, but there's not necessarily an interaction going on between characters. So this is a little bit different and specific that you want to deal with in a certain way. Obviously, to start out a paragraph, you're going to have a thesis, and then we're going to introduce some evidence to back up the thesis. So there's some things you're going to want to have when you actually get into writing this concrete detail or this evidence. For a typical format, a basic format, you would want a transition, a comma after the transition, a lead in, and we'll talk about that in a moment, right? The actual word for word quoted material, and then you're going to want the page number in parentheses, and then a period. All right, so let's talk through this really quickly. A transition would be some way to let your reader know that you're going to be giving an example. You gave a thesis and now you're going to prove it. It could be for like the first CD or concrete detail in a paragraph, the first example in a paragraph. You could say something like, for example, all right, comma. You could say in addition, not in addition, you could say for instance, okay, comma, something like that. You move further into the paragraph with like a second piece of evidence. That's when you want to say in addition, okay, comma. You could say additionally. You could say also, something like that. As you get, towards the end of the essay, maybe one of the last pieces of evidence, you can say finally. You could say lastly even, okay? As you introduce your evidence, you're just giving the reader something to know that you're introducing some more, material, quotes or whatever it happens to be. All right, so that's a transition. So over here with our quote, we're going to actually just put the transition in there. And we'll say this is the first one in the paragraph. So we'll say, for example, comma. Okay, a lead-in. Remember, this is a dialogue. These are characters speaking in this play. That's what we're focusing on in this video. So you're going to want to deal with a couple things in here. You want to say who is speaking. Okay? You want to say to whom are they speaking. And then we need the context. In other words, we need to know what happened in the play that made this character say this. What just went down. Okay, so a couple rules of thumb for that. Number one, it has to be specific, not general plot summary. All right, we don't want to say something like a bunch of jurors were talking and one of them said this. So we want to be specific as to what exactly just happened, not general plot summary. Secondly, it has to be a phrase, usually, not a complete sentence. Why is that? Well, simply, most of your quotes that you're going to have, oftentimes we just tend to quote things that are already complete sentences. So if our phrase or our lead-in is not a phrase but a complete sentence, that's going to make a run-on. And you don't want to have a run-on in a sentence. It just is not good grammar, right? So we want it to be a phrase as well. All right, so what do we need to do for that then? We look at this and I need to know, well, where did this come from in the play? That's always the rule of thumb. Look at where you're getting your quote. So if we look in the play, we have in this exchange here between 10 and 8. 10 is just retelling this old woman's testimony as though she is totally reliable, right? And 8 is like, well, wait a second, because earlier in the play, 10 had gone on this rant, right, about how he can't trust and does not trust people that are from the slums, that you can't trust a single one of them. And then he recounts her testimony as though it's, absolute truth. And 8 confronts his bias, confronts 10's prejudice by saying, how can you believe her? She's one of them too, isn't she? Okay, so that's the context. So we can go back in here and we can work that into our essay, and that way we know that we are on track. So what do I want to do then? I want to set up a phrase. So we're going to say, although juror 10 had told the jury that he did not trust anyone from the slums. Okay, so I have part of my background there. He then proceeds to retell the old woman's testimony until juror 8 asks, comma. All right, so do I have who? Yeah, juror 8. Do I have, or to whom? He's talking to juror 10. Do I have the context? Absolutely. I say very clearly that 8 is responding to a couple things that 10 had earlier said. All right, so there it is. Word for word quoted material. There you go right there. And I don't have to have all this. I can adjust this. So this is what I would maybe want to do, because maybe I'm like, ooh, I say ask there, and then he says ask here. So I could easily, shrink this down a little bit to this if I wanted to, if I didn't like the repetition. Until juror 8 asks, you don't believe the boy's story, how can you believe the woman's? She's one of them too. Now here's a little issue. A quote within a quote, we're going to have a single quotation mark, right? Like that. That's where this would go. All right, we have this question mark here. Now normally we don't have any punctuation within the quote here at the end, unless there is specific punctuation, like a question mark or an exclamation point. But we're not going to put a comma there. We're not going to put a colon there. We're not going to put a period there. No, 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 no. The period will always go here at the end, right there. All right? That's how that should be set up at the end. So there you go. That's the basic setup for a quote so that it's properly documented and led into providing the context for the reader. All right? So transition lead-in, the quote, the number only, because this is MLA format. You don't want a P period or a PG period or anything else besides just the number for MLA format. And that's how we want to set up our concrete detail or our evidence in an essay. After this is when we would write analysis or commentary or surrounding this perhaps. But this is the basic setup that you would want to try to follow to make sure that you include everything a reader needs to know to understand the background of the quote.